are rolling.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here this morning. I really appreciate the continued work of the teams and look forward to hearing about your progress in the breakout rooms later today. I was missing last week. I was also in a nice warm weather place out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico and the Bahamas and so on a music cruise. So that was a lot of fun, 40 bands over 5 nights and days of music. So feeling very refreshed and excited to be back at work. Today, we're going to learn all about fiber networks and how fiber networks work and how they, the capacities and the applications they're going to be able to support. We're going to hear that from Jeff Brown of Calix, which is one of the major equipment manufacturers around fiber networks. They're a key partner with many, many deployments, and especially with the smaller companies, the cooperatives, the privately held companies, really used to working in rural places. And Calix has a long history in this industry of working in rural places. After Jeff, we're going to hear from a broadband provider, Bluebird Networks, and Laura Pappenfort is going to talk about their middle mile network that they have in Illinois and the role of middle mile networks and how you might see Bluebird then as a partner moving forward as you think about your own plans. And so without further ado, we're going to have Jeff Brown talk to us about fiber networks and Calix and the marvels of what fiber optics brings to broadband communications. Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Bill. Pleasure to be here. I've spoken on a couple of these Illinois communities and really enjoy it. So let me tell you just real briefly about myself and Calix. As Bill mentioned, we're one of the leaders in North America on software and access platforms for networking, essentially kind of the plumbing of the internet infrastructure. And I know Laura's going to talk a little bit about that as well. From the perspective of providing that kind of plumbing to all of the different people who run networks. So our customers are always network operators. So they're either traditional telephone companies, telephone cooperatives, nonprofits. There are a lot of utilities that are moving into the broadband space that are our customers, cable companies, wireless ISPs that we affectionately call WISPs. So a number of different providers like that. Anybody who provides fiber service, we have over 2,000 of those customers. We're actually headquartered out of Silicon Valley. You can see us or tracking stock, and I've been with the company about 6 years. We were around $6 a share when I joined. We've been as high as 80. I think we're on 50 right now. I actually am located in Illinois. I'm in Naperville. I run the segment marketing growth programs for us, so helping us target and grow our business with various kinds of vertical operators. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Fiber 101. We've also are pretty involved in the what we'll call it kind of precision farming space. There's different buzzwords for that. But this will be just a sort of a brief overview of why fiber is important. Our mission statement at Calix, and one of the reasons I really joined the company, is to help bridge that digital divide. We do work with predominantly rural providers, helping them obtain private funding or government funding. And, we've seen the effects of how delivering broadband to your communities can really enhance not just the actual experience of the individuals, but actually enhance the improving statistics, the overall value of the community. So I wanted to share a couple of statistics for you. I will say that this is sort of an emerging space where, because of the prevalence of funding now in fiber, there are a lot of different entities in all sorts of different industries, not just ours, that are trying to gather statistics around and quantify what the impact is on bringing fiber to to your community. You see that with various chambers of commerce. The real estate industry is really trying to get some figures around how having fiber connected to a residence, what the quantifiable increase in the value of the home is. There are some statistics around that. I won't share them right now because it's more of a growing space where we're trying to get a wider sample set of data. But I did want to share two big statistics here. One is, and there's been a number of studies that kind of actually correlate these numbers, and this number might actually be understated a little. About 2/3 of the people choose where they're going to live based on having a reliable high-speed internet connection. And that doesn't mean just work from home or teleworkers, but that means the population in general, as people are looking to move, that is one on their checklist of questions. They want to understand what the broadband connection is like, and if there is a fiber connection to the premise that they're going to live in, that checks the box for them. The second is the number of studies around this showing an actual per capita growth correlated to the increase in high-speed broadband access. So there's been some statistics that actually demonstrate that as you deploy fiber within a community, it uplifts the entire community in a number of ways, making it more attractive, making it more viable for businesses to conduct their business. And obviously from the residential standpoint, another area that we're working on is really trying to provide what we call community-wide Wi-Fi. That's, in simple terms, a wireless connection, but the simple use case that's being deployed today is, instead of having students having to go to McDonald's or somewhere where they can get a Starbucks to get a Wi-Fi connection, do their homework, it actually would be fairly widely available within the community, and the service provider would enable that. So those are sort of areas where we're trying to make broadband more pervasive. Anywhere all the time is an ideal. Obviously, as many of you know, we're a long way from that, but trying to make it more pervasive within the community is the intent. So why fiber? What makes fiber more attractive than other technologies? I don't think there's any argument or dispute whatsoever that fiber is the ideal technology. It has unmatched capacity. I won't throw all the math and the numbers at you, but there's no question anywhere in the industry or outside the industry that in an ideal scenario you would want to deploy fiber, because it has almost unlimited capability to provide traffic. It has extended reach. Many of the technologies that we'll call legacy or brownfield are the terms we use for technologies that have been in place for a number of years. Coaxial cable, copper, fixed wireless, those have limitations. In terms of the coax and the copper, it's in hundreds of feet as far as the limitations before you need to start deploying fairly expensive amplifiers to kind of power that signal. Fixed wireless has some limitations around line of sight, meaning, if you've got a radio and the other end, there needs to be no interference between the two. So there's some limitations there. With fiber, you actually have a significant reach that can be deployed. Very flexible deployment. I won't get into the ways that you see fiber, but usually people that are outside the industry, they understand fiber deployments because, oh yeah, it's either aerial, which means kind of up on poles, utility poles, telephone poles. It could be underground. You'll hear direct boring is one way, so it's sort of a deeper trench, or micro trenching, which is just going minimally into the surface, less invasive. There are a number of ways to deploy the fiber, but it's very flexible. And as I show you with some of the architectures, it's much more complicated than a simple sort of point-to-point connection. Longevity. I think the initial fiber networks that were deployed on a long haul basis back in the day, say in the 80s with the AT&Ts and MCIs and other, those long haul fiber networks had, estimated sort of 40-year shelf life. The newer versions of fiber that are coming out have even extended longevity beyond that. Upgradability, I could spend a lot of time talking about this, but essentially there's a lot of ways to upgrade the capacity without actually touching the fiber itself. It's on the endpoints. So less disruption is really important for the user's customer experience. And of course, you don't want to see your what we call outside plant. You don't want to see all of your neighborhoods and roads being torn up and having technicians take service down because they're having to fix everything. That's what's very common today in the existing copper and coaxial networks. A lot of disruption of outside plant. And then low maintenance cost. The numbers here, you'll see different numbers if you look at the industry stats. We actually have operators, who have made the move, say, for example, cable operators totally upgrading from legacy coax to fiber. And their estimate is they will save at least 50% every year on OpEx, 90% on power consumption, because basically when I explain how the PON network works, there's no need for all these backup batteries. And that's so if you're in battery sales, that's not good. But for everybody else, it's a significantly less expensive network to maintain. So some of the factors that are driving this deployment, I think it's important, even if you're not in the business, but you kind of need to understand, hey, why is there so much fiber deployment going on in the world, but especially in the United States? The first is the pandemic really accelerated a lot of behaviors that were already taking place, right? So you started to see in this century more people working from home. That obviously accelerated significantly during the pandemic. And if you look at a lot of statistics, it's not dropping off and going back to the pre-pandemic levels. You're seeing quite a bit of work from anywhere continuing to stay in place. So people, obviously, if you're working from home, you need to get on that Zoom call or that Teams call. Maybe you forgot to download the file that everyone's talking about on your meeting, and you need to pull up that PowerPoint or that Excel spreadsheet. So the importance of needing good connectivity, but especially what we call upstream connectivity, which is really critical for these video applications, is super important. So that's driven the need for what we call a symmetrical type of connection, which is what fiber is, meaning the speeds you get are the same both downstream and upstream. So previously, you go back a few years, if you had cable service or somebody, or if you're in a very remote area, satellite service, the bandwidth that they would tell you that you were getting was simply a downstream bandwidth. It didn't in any way connotate what the upstream was, because that was significantly limited. So consumers essentially got very savvy in this work from home environment and started really understanding the difference between downstream and upstream, and started demanding upstream. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of fiber deployment to be able to accommodate those video applications. In addition, you've got some degree of e-learning that's still going on, and what's really important in the last, say, 3 years or so is this recognition of it's not just the broadband speed that I get to my residence, but where I can get the actual coverage. So the importance of whole home coverage has become something that's very critical now in the industry. So the ability to be able to use your broadband throughout the home, in the basement, out on the front porch, in every room of the home, right? As people, as in the pandemic, as people were sheltering and they were at home, and people wanted to go essentially use the internet in different places in their home, that sort of concept of where you have good coverage or not became very important. So whole home coverage and the pandemic really accelerated some behaviors that were already in place. Now, this is extremely important. If you think back over the years, most people got their content, their essentially video, TV, if you want to call it, from traditional cable. There's something called an RF port. It goes over the coax, goes over the airwaves, maybe. All of that every year has increasingly moved to what we call over the top or streaming. So essentially, the video content, the majority of video content now in the United States is actually consumed over the top, meaning that more people have cut the cord and get their video from streaming than they do from traditional cable. The inflection point actually happened this year. It had been increasing that way for a number of years. So that's why you've seen a lot of cable operators pivot their business strategy from traditional cable TV to becoming more pure broadband providers, or actually a number of them getting into the wireless space as well with that bundle. So what that means if you're running a network, it means all the traffic that captures the video services now needs to be carried over that pipe that comes into your house. So the sizing of that pipe has increased dramatically. It's becoming huge, which lends you to looking at fiber very favorably, because at some point you're going to need a fiber-based service to kind of capture all that video traffic. And then the last major factor, there are a number of factors, but the last one is around the number of connected devices in the home, right? You go to any type of technology conference, people ask, raise your hand if you have 25 or more connected devices, and it seems like the vast majority of the audience raises their hand. You have people with well over 50, some over 100 connected devices, and those are probably the devices that we all kind of recognize as gaming devices, cell phones, PCs, etc., printers. But there are also a number of devices that are we call kind of latently connected, meaning they have an IP address, they're capturing statistics, carrying some kind of traffic, but they're not real obvious to the customer. So digital cameras are one, thermostats, any of these things that kind of fall in the category of smart home, right? So the number of devices has just proliferated, which means that it's increased the amount of bandwidth, but probably more importantly, it's increased the importance of prioritizing that traffic, right? If you're at home, you're at work and you need to get it on a Zoom call, you want your Zoom call to take priority on that pipe versus, say, your Nest thermostat, right? You want that Zoom call to be number one in priority. So it's become important for the operators who are running the broadband service to be able to manage and prioritize the applications. And I think there's a good analogy here when we talk about agriculture a lot on the concept of connected devices and how it relates to fiber. So if you're a network operator, from their perspective, some of the additional drivers for them to provide fiber, one is you can serve multiple customer segments, right? You previously really couldn't, with traditional coax, copper, and fixed wireless, you couldn't really provide true enterprise level business services. You certainly couldn't provide what we call mobile backhaul type services, where you're providing connectivity to the mobile operator. So it allows you to be able to serve multiple customer segments. Obviously, as you get into denser areas, you have things like multi-tenant units, or we call them MDUs, that can be very favorably served as well. So it allows the operator to kind of monetize their investment. They are able to capture traffic from different sources, not just the neighborhoods in a residential. You see a lot of utilities that are moving into the space. That makes a lot of sense. They've got a smart grid, so they have a lot of the right of way already in place. By deploying fiber, it allows them to reduce the number of power outages, and you're going to continually see, I think we're probably in the early stages of this sort of smart grid modernization effort that needs to take place across the United States. If you're an operator, you might, if you deploy fiber, you might be able to bring 5G to your community quicker, right? So the mobile operators that are deploying 5G, they capture all that wireless traffic on the towers, but it has to go somewhere, and it has to go somewhere over fiber. So they need to, what they call, backhaul it. They need to take it out over those middle mile providers that Laura is going to talk about, and they need to do that. And if those fiber connections aren't in place, it makes it hard for them to deploy those 5G cells, or what we call small cells. So when there's cell densification, which is a fancy way of saying with some of these 5G deployments, you need a lot of cells closer together. If you have a fiber network to be able to support that, we've actually seen examples where the big mobile operators, the Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T have prioritized certain communities over others to deliver 5G to faster. And then of course, the last one, as I mentioned, low OpEx. It's the biggest selling point really from a operator perspective around fiber. And it's enabling a lot of the operators to really focus on the customer experience, right? I mean, how many times have you thought about maybe your broadband or your phone service as sort of a utility? It doesn't give you that sort of robust experience that you get with a lot of other web-based applications. If you just think about things like shopping online on Amazon or Netflix, those are very kind of intent-based, right? They remember what you bought. They offer you suggestions based on your patterns and history. And so you're going to see broadband providers, there are already examples today where they're kind of moving towards that. And they're able to do that and focus more on providing a better overall customer experience because they now have the underlying infrastructure in place that they don't have to worry about as much. And they could divert their resources to focusing on things like, like giving a better overall subscriber experience. So some very basics on fiber. I will not dive into all of this, but the simple way to think about it is you've got a point-to-point. It's not a point-to-point type network. It's basically a shared network. The two big things, and this is the most common, by far the most common deployment of fiber, in the world, is with a PON network. It's passive, meaning only the endpoints are lit. So if you're in flood-prone areas, right, where you have a lot of like electrically powered pieces of equipment, in a cable or a coax or a copper network, you've got all these potential points of failure that can go out, in a flood prone area. Here in a PON network, it's really only the we'll call it the data center head end central office OLT, and then the devices that either are inside the home or outside the home with the ONTs. It's a shared network. You'll hear the term XGS-PON. That's the most widely deployed technology today. The key things to remember, it's symmetrical and it provides up to 10 gig. There is some overhead, if you want to get really specific, some overhead involved. So if a customer said, hey, I want a 10 gig symmetrical circuit, it's actually going to be more like 8.8, but there are other ways to handle customers like that if you're having an enterprise type application. Architecture is real simple, just in case if you kind of get in these discussions, all kinds of what we call split ratios. You see deployments out there today that are 128 different customers sitting on what we call the same PON or the same ODN optical data network. 32 is probably most common. You look at the upper right, there are operators who've deployed essentially what you call a active Ethernet, which is a point-to-point type service for a customer. You've seen that in municipalities. You've seen that in some places. It's the most expensive and it's the most complicated to operate because you're obviously giving someone a dedicated bandwidth across the way. The vast majority of operators have moved to the shared network, which has the same concepts as coax, right? It's a shared network engineered correctly to be able to provide the required service to everyone. And you see on the lower right, essentially what you call distributed tap. You'll see homes that have, 2 homes passed per mile that are getting fiber deployed. Not to say that there aren't complications or expenses associated with that, but more and more increasingly, especially in the newer environment, you're seeing fiber deployed everywhere. So some use cases of how we would integrate fixed wireless and fiber. So keep in mind, fixed wireless is a point-to-point. It could use licensed spectrum. It could use unlicensed. So what do I mean by that? If you use a baby monitor or you garage door opener, that's unlicensed spectrum, right? That spectrum's out there. We have all sorts of applications every day that all of us use. People have stood up businesses using unlicensed spectrum. Licensed spectrum means you go out and you pay the FCC a bunch of money for bandwidth, and it's guaranteed that it's yours. That gets into some of the weeds of how it's deployed, but basically, here's a very typical example. That orange circle depicts fiber. It's a fiber ring. You've got a rural telephone cooperative. We've got, I think there are 300 in the United States, probably like 260 of them are our customers. They'll go out and deploy a fiber ring to serve their members, right? They're not looking to make money and profit here, but just to serve their members. But then they find that with the fiber, they can only reach so many, right? So in this particular example, this customer had about 300 subscribers utilizing fiber. So what they decided to do was leverage some of the grain legs and the water towers that exist in their community, basically set up little radios on those to deploy fixed wireless access. So fixed wireless access, they were able to serve small businesses and homes. And then after offering the fixed wireless, they saw they tripled their number of subscribers. They're well over 1,000 now. So those two work together seamlessly. Another example is fiber to the premise. So you have a community with fiber to all the homes and businesses, but maybe you're in a valley or you've got to go across some huge divide. You can use fixed wireless to get across that with the you see the little the tower there below, 1.2 gigahertz fixed wire. So there's a number of different examples where that works. They're not either or technologies. They're very complementary to each other. And when we start talking about agriculture, almost everything, starts with a wireless connection, right? If you think about this example here, everything here starts with a wireless connection, but all that traffic at some point has to be aggregated onto a fiber network. So the deeper you can get fiber into community, the more you can support these various type of agriculture applications. And we work with a number of operators to kind of help them develop their optimal technology to support these applications. So here's an example, of statistics. These are not our statistics. These are ones that we pulled from the agriculture companies, and you can see the benefits they've gotten from being able to deploy this type of technology in their environment. And here I'll finish with a couple of just simple examples. On the left, you've essentially got technology that you can use to keep you from wasting energy on going over crops at the same time, either cutting or watering. It eliminates that type of redundancy, makes you more efficient. Now on the right, you've got these soil profiles, right? You capture this technology, and then you can look at it. You can identify which part of your farms need extra effort versus others, and all of those start with a wireless connection, but then they need to be what we call backhauled or aggregated. All that traffic kind of goes together onto a fiber connection. So does the fiber, sometimes people say, does the fiber actually have to connect to the field? It doesn't have to, but it helps to be in the vicinity where that traffic can be wirelessly aggregated and brought onto a fiber connection. So I could spend all day talking about this. It's a passion of mine, but I just wanted to give you a brief overview and give Laura plenty of time to talk. So I'll turn over to Laura now. Thank you. Oh, Laura, I think you're on mute.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff, and welcome, Laura. I was on mute when I was talking, so it's a best practice
Sorry,
this morning.
That's right.
No, that's welcome. Welcome, Laura. Thanks for joining.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this opportunity. And I wanted to, before I start and share my screen, I wanted to kind of tell everyone my approach as I thought about what I would do to share information about middle mile and fiber in general. So I taught technology classes for 20 years at the college level to community leaders and in the continuing education. And so this is kind of a safe spot for me, something that I do really enjoy. But so I thought about what you're engaged in planning and trying to grasp what is kind of coming down. And so I tried to put it into perspective that I thought, what would I be wanting to know if I were in that situation? And I know many of you are very technical savvy, some not so much. So I tried to make it as much of middle of the road, and I welcome questions as I go through. Please feel free to interrupt me. I'm happy to answer any questions as we go. So one second, and I'll share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen.
Looks good.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'll just say a little bit about Bluebird Network. As Bill said on the opening, we are a fiber provider. We only do middle mile fiber. We have presence in 11 states in the Midwest, and Missouri and Illinois are our two primary states that we do business in. We are a rural, since the inception of Bluebird, we have always worked in the rural areas. We do have exchanges in more populated areas, but that's only to move traffic out into the rural communities. So we do have a lot of experience on economic development and how that improves unserved and underserved communities. We've seen it happen that, we bring fiber into a community, and we find, just as Jeff mentioned, more kids are going away to college and coming back and staying there simply because they can start a business. They have the internet available to them for uploads and downloads and just all kinds of activity that they wouldn't have had otherwise. I do live in Kansas City today. I just recently bought a house in Illinois in Mason County, so I'm excited about that. And I've only had it for about 3 weeks, and I'm looking forward to getting that all going. So we need to bring internet to Mason County too.
Yes, we do. I'm so excited. I live in Mason County. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm so excited. Where are you going to live?
I bought a house in Havana.
Oh, great. I live in Manitou.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'm very familiar. I actually have gone to church there a couple of times.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm Deanna. Nice to meet you. I'll let you keep going.
Okay, very good. Okay, so moving on. So this is kind of an outline of the topics that we're going to talk about. How does the internet work? What is middle mile? What is an internet exchange? And how does it all come together, and who benefits from it? So this is kind of a busy slide, but I wanted to be able to provide everyone with some points of information that you can take back to your breakout sessions. Kind of gives you an overview of the internet and a fiber network in general. The illustration over to the right is Bluebird's network, and Bluebird's network essentially goes along rural highways, in and out of areas where there might be things, we call them community anchor institutions, which would be schools, healthcare facilities, and government entities. And we also things like lock and dam, critical infrastructure that might need a larger bandwidth. So most of what a middle mile provider will carry is a long fiber bundle that may have, as many as 288 fibers in that bundle. So as you look at this map here, you can kind of, I know it's pretty small, but you can kind of see Bluebird has a data center in Davenport, and you can kind of see the existing fiber, Bluebird fiber, that goes throughout the state of Illinois. So essentially the internet, the name internet comes from interconnected networks, and that's really what it is. So your home might have a Wi-Fi connection in it. That in itself is a network. It connects to what we call a last mile provider. That would be your your internet provider, and they have a network of all the residential homes, small businesses. So that is the network, and that network will connect to a middle mile provider that will, some people had referred to it as long haul, but now it really has captured, because long haul is really something a little bit different. But the middle mile carries the traffic back to a data center or an internet exchange. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. So not unlike your electrical network or your water network, if you think about your panel, if you kind of think about electricity and your distribution panel that's in, a silver box someplace in your home, then as you take that, you aggregate that electricity out to your outlets, your switches, and things within your home, that in itself is a network. It's taking a lot of energy or electricity, and it's distributing it throughout your house for the needs of that the end user, if you will, which in this case might be a lamp. Same thing is true for a fiber network. You have a regional source, which is usually the exchange, internet exchange, and then you have end users. End users can be residential, business, it can be cell towers, farms, critical infrastructure, schools, healthcare, and government entities. So from a county perspective, as I thought more and more about this, I would be thinking, how can I get the biggest bang for my buck? And how can I get internet to my community? And then, part of it will be education, and part of it will be making the right decision kind of the first time, as opposed to in some areas I have seen decisions being made just little tiny steps at a time, and often it's better to really research it and figure out what you need, so you have the right fiber count, so you have the right infrastructure waiting for the economic development of the community in the rural area. So as Jeff mentioned, every device on the network, and that means your cell phone, that means your printer, that means the big data center equipment, every device has an IP address. And so the IP address is a unique identifier for that piece of equipment. And what happens when you send an email, that email as it goes through the internet, it's searching for a destination, an IP address of a particular piece of or series of equipments, and that comes through. That IP address is what we call a header in that data traffic transmission through the internet. And so it's directing through routers and switches where to find that destination in a packet switch network, which is what the internet is. So as the packet goes through, the most effective way to work with downstream networks, which is what we just talked about in your home or in your business or in the community, is to have a multi-fiber bundle to carry that IP traffic to the internet exchange. Bluebird has, in Quad Cities, like I mentioned, an internet exchange with 53 peers. And this may or may not, the reason why it's important for Illinois in particular, as you're looking at different fiber options, in that internet exchange, we peer with Google, Facebook. There's 53 different entities that actually peer into that switch location, that data location. So if your son or daughter is doing a research paper and they Google something, then they can, as that internet packet goes to the data center and hits that exchange, because Google is also peering there, it doesn't really have to go out on the main internet. It actually goes straight in, because Google's peered there, it goes straight into Google and works through that more or less internally. And I'll show you this on a picture on my next slide. But it matters because there's only 242 internet exchange points in the United States. So think about that, 242, there's really only 180 some odd locations. And one of those is in Davenport, Iowa. And that is, so as you're asking questions, whether it's Bluebird or, whoever the middle mile provider might be, that's a good question to ask. And I have that at the end of the slide. What should you consider? Because if you can get to a data center within a relatively short distance, that can either get you out to the internet or peer with some other companies that your county or farmers or business entities might need to use, it creates a much faster and seamless connection. So there is a lot to it. But that's one thing I certainly would ask. So here is the illustration. And so I'm going to start over here to the left. We talked about internet exchange. This is the Quad Cities data center. And here is the internet cloud. So we have our internet exchange here, and the internet exchange, I kind of put this little graphic in here so we could see that data comes in here. It can either go out to the internet, it can loop back around to another peering entity like Facebook, Amazon, the different small and large companies that peer into that particular exchange. So as you look at the middle mile is going to be multi-strand. So Bluebird typically puts in 288 fibers in a middle mile route. And so what that gives us the opportunity to doing, as I just mentioned earlier, we would rather lay a big bundle of fiber, yes, it's a little bit more expensive, but it also creates a more long-term opportunity. And we're going to be splitting off that fiber as we go. In this illustration, you'll see that I have this goes straight to a community here, and there's another community here. So as we go and drop fiber to cell towers, drop fiber to critical infrastructure, drop fiber to a last mile provider that might be bringing fiber to the residential home or this neighborhood in this case. We're splitting off fiber, we're pulling out fiber from that bundle, and for each of these things as we go. And so when we get to this community, so here's a community where a last mile provider would actually be servicing this community. Bluebird doesn't do any residential fiber. The only building type fiber that we do, we would drop it off here, hand it off, what's called a handoff, to a last mile provider, and they have the resources and the expertise to take it to the community itself. And that could be utility companies. I know a couple of utility companies that have come on board in rural communities where they originally didn't think that they would, but they're able to do set up their equipment so that they don't always have to dispatch a technical person when a new customer comes on board or there's a problem. A lot of it they can handle from their primary center. They didn't think they would do it, but they were able to do it fairly cost effective. And once the internet came to their town and they had competition in their last mile providers, became a lot more cost effective. And also businesses, residential areas within that town, community services within that town. And this is a policeman and a firewoman. So emergency services, these are all the things that a last mile provider or a cable provider or an ISP, internet service provider that's a little bit just food for thought, that's different. Usually internet service provider only provides data services, and as opposed to some last mile providers, they will provide phone and data, and sometimes they have kind of a list of different services. So, but the fiber bundle, so we also will spin off. Bluebird will offer go into the community. A lot of times there might be a hospital, rural hospital, maybe some doctor's offices that are part of that hospital community. And then also schools. We talked about just briefly about online schools. This is a huge benefit for rural communities to be able for people to take higher level education classes with reliable internet. It's a big boost for the community from an economic development perspective. And then
Laura?
also, yes.
Hi, two things. One is time is flying, so I want to just make you aware of that. And then two is Adrienne Furness has a question.
Okay.
Oh, thanks, Bill. So Laura, I was curious as to the box sort of at the bottom that says that you're have fiber to the farm off your middle mile, versus what I would normally think of is that the farm would be treated to some degree like a residence, a farmhouse, and be serviced by a last mile provider. Can you talk a little bit to that?
I'd be happy to. Yeah, so the model that Bluebird is taking is, this is more or less a fiber handoff here. And so the Bluebird would drop in the fiber link here, and this is a pretty big farm, as you can see, but it would drop it off, and so the farm could actually do some type, there's several different options that they would have to be able to do some type of Wi-Fi, some type of creating their own connectivity between, a lot of farm equipment has Bluetooth available and different types of opportunities for connectivity. And so Michael and I talked about this before I did this, because Bluebird is thinking, one of the things that Bluebird does that's a little bit unique, as we go down the highway in a rural area, we drop boxes, handoff boxes at every intersection so that we don't have to come back. And if we need to go down another rural road, or, we already have the box in place, buried underground. Bluebird does 100% underground buried fiber, which is really great in Tornado Alley, as opposed to aerial. But yes, this is what Bluebird's model, what we're looking for today is that Bluebird would actually drop off fiber along this highway, if you will, or rural road. And then from there, either the farmer, there's a lot of companies, and I can share some of those with you afterwards, that are doing the connectivity to the farm. They're not necessarily last mile providers. They're part of the whole precision farming initiative.
So essentially, it's a handhold that's placed at the end of a, say, farmer's driveway that then would allow that farm to do the kind of field connectivity that a really strong fiber backbone would bring.
Yes, and so what we're finding too, in terms of fiber to the farm, farmers are really doing more upload than download. So playing less video games and sending more data in an upload scenario. And so that's kind of important to be able to have that flexibility. Because a lot of times in your rural areas, like in your home, they'll tell you, your download speeds are 300 meg or whatever, and your upload speeds are 20.
And so Laura, one last question, and then I'll stop. So to the degree that you could provide, which counties we're in, and you could provide a map as to which roads you're already in, then those counties could look at either as you're placing new fiber, where those handholds could be dug, or where they currently exist to be utilized by farms in a county.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah. And so having grown up on a farm myself, I know we were talking about this, and I said, so the farmer doesn't have contiguous land all around their house. They have land over here, they do corn over here, soybeans over here, and so it's really it's more complex than just dropping it off here. I mean, you would still drop it off here, but then there probably would be a number of different solutions to get to the different areas that a farmer needed to get to. So they're all going to be different, is what I believe. So I would say from a community perspective, from a county perspective, having more, right now you have microwave towers for the most part in the counties that I looked at every county. You have a lot of microwave there. Microwave is microwave is where, it's a point-to-point connection for your cell phone. And the problem with that is when you have bad weather, or when that point-to-point visual connection, line of sight connection gets out of whack from high winds or lightning strike, or can be a number of things, then you lose connectivity with your cell phone. And I used to say, when I lived in a rural community, we had to stand on the front porch in the corner on a good day, to get cell service. So hopefully with broadband connection in a middle mile fiber provider, then it just inspires more of, T-Mobile, AT&T, all of the carriers to put in more cell towers, because they no longer, because they can get fiber to the tower. And that's usually provided by the middle mile provider. Same is true with critical infrastructure. Bluebird has several different types of airports, power plants, things like that require a big fat bandwidth of network capability. So And this is a guy that's running away that was trying to steal something, but because the farmer has cameras on everything, he doesn't get it. So I'll just talk briefly because I do know that we are almost out of time. So an internet exchange, or an IX for short, is where everything comes together. And we talked about the Bluebird's internet exchange in Quad Cities. And it just provides the interconnection between the series of networks, as I mentioned earlier. So how does it all come together? So again, here is the person that is sitting at home. They have a home business or their internal network of whatever, possibly Wi-Fi. Here's our last mile provider, and your home or business and the last mile provider are connected. Last mile provider is connected to your middle mile provider. And again, this goes down from, down your rural highways, intersections. If I were a county on a leadership group in a county, I would try to work with some middle mile providers, because, as we welcome the opportunity to work with anybody. More information we can get from you about your desires or future growth, or what you anticipate, the better we can engineer the middle mile network. And then ultimately that all goes to the internet exchange, where it gets shuffled around depending upon the IP address and the packet header. Sometimes it'll loop back into your community if you're sending if your request is from your neighbor. It'll go all the way back to that data center and then come back to your neighbor, but it doesn't ever have to go out on the internet to get back to your neighbor. And the same would be true for if you do business in Chicago, because the this internet exchange connects to the one in Chicago. It's a pretty fast route. And so I think that's really important, which is one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up. So that's the end of my presentation. Does anybody have any questions or anything I can address?
Laura and Jeff, here's kind of a general question. It's about the whole choice of being on poles or being in underground. And we know in Illinois, there's a lot of challenges around right-of-way access in places due to the easements rather than public right-of-way kind of set up in some of those areas. Can we have a general discussion on making that decision? Why don't you go first, Laura?
Sure. Bluebird only does underground. We have a lot of experience in working through that in rural communities. Easement access is always an issue. We have solved that problem many different ways. We do try to work through, and we really understand where people may not want to have, fiber into, in their easement area. We clearly understand that. And sometimes we go way, and not sometimes, a lot of times, we go way out of our way to maybe choose a different route, to collaborate, communicate together to make that happen. But we have learned that aerial fiber in rural communities where it takes an hour for a technician to get there, it just doesn't work very well. Underground is so much more reliable, and we think that rural communities should expect the same reliability that is available anywhere. And so other than on bridges where we do bridge connections, we are above ground going across bridges. Bluebird does everything underground.
Okay, thanks. Jeff, what are your thoughts? And I know a lot of electric co-ops, when they get into business, they already have the
Yeah.
poles.
There are pros and cons to both approaches. It's a business case and it's a reach issue. So it depends on what you're starting with. If you're an existing cable provider, certainly you can use the existing pole lines, overlay aerial fiber. And in fact, the OLTs, can be powered off the cable plant. That's the most economical way to do it. In utility space, as I mentioned, they've got that right away, right? They've got those transmission lines. That makes the most sense for them to very cost effectively reach their members and subscribers. Now, you get into some nuances about the type of fiber. They typically, for the transmission OSS stuff, use OPGW, and ADSS is more recommended. So it's a different type of fiber, but it's still essentially aerial. Clearly, underground is the most recommended. It's going to be the most resilient, less subject to weather conditions and trucks driving into pole and things like that. It's just significantly more expensive. And depending on the terrain, you're not going to see it as commonly. If you go to the Everglades in Florida, it's going to be a lot more aerial. So it's just a variety of factors. It's a business case. In an ideal world, I would certainly recommend underground. But, in today's environment, especially as we're trying to reach more challenging kind of environments, you have to look at all the tools in your toolbox.
Thanks, Jeff. I was seeing the chat, and thanks so much, Terrence, around middle mile. That there's other middle mile providers in Illinois. And Laura, maybe you could comment. Is everyone going to the same places? So it's just like many rural, broadband things. There might be 5 providers and where all the businesses are, but 1 or 0 in other places.
Oh, yeah.
Is that the same thing with middle mile, or is that you guys kind of stake out different territories?
Yeah, there's not a lot of staking out different territories. I mean, there are absolutely, everybody has competition in the middle mile arena. Some of the things that, and I kind of put this on my very last slide, questions to consider. If I was a community leader looking at this, I would ask these questions. Now, the answers to those questions, just as Jeff alluded to, they don't necessarily have to be a particular answer, but it's information that you want to know before weighing your decision. But there are, I don't know how many middle mile providers, but I suspect, well, in some last mile providers, they do build out, the long haul portion of theirs. Not many, because it makes so much more sense to be more cost effective if they can utilize a middle mile provider and their fiber and their build infrastructure. And just as Jeff said, it's pretty expensive to do that long haul piece. But yes, there's.
And why is fiber count and fiber bundle? I know the answer. I'm trying to lead you all to talk about why is that important for a community to ask that question?
Yeah, you sure don't want to have, do millions of dollars worth. I mean, these builds are millions and millions of dollars. And when you're going to go in and bury cable, you sure don't want to have to do it again. So we try to bury is a bundle that has as many fibers as makes sense for. So every time you lay fiber, you think it needs to at a minimum last 20 years. And so Bluebird tries to estimate from an engineering perspective of somewhere between 30 and 40 years, which in technology industry is pretty crazy in general. But to have enough fibers in the ground so that we can split off and we don't run out of fibers, because one of the things that we know, we do have some competitors in Missouri, not so much in Illinois, that they don't have any more fiber. So the plant that they originally buried is there, but new communities can't get any more fibers because they are out of available fiber, because when they originally laid it, they laid, a 24 strand or something like that.
Laura, are you guys putting that in conduit, or is that in just direct buried bundle?
Yes, it's in conduit, and then at intersections, we do like a concrete overlay. So, because that's where you find most of your backhoes.
Okay, yeah. And then another question is about we've seen some counties think, well, let's say there's no middle mile providers out in the rural countryside. So the county says, let's build our own middle mile network to connect all the communities and maybe the anchor institutions. Clearly, a lot of them think, let's partner with the provider to make that happen. So county might get 24 fibers or 48, and then a provider like yourself might put in another bundle of 200 or whatever, 288.
Yep.
Have you guys engaged in that kind of partnership, and you talk about that at all?
Yep. Yes. That's kind of part of our commitment to the community anchor institutions is, so it would be typical that a county might say, for these particular communities, we need 24 fibers to do this and that, or we need 12 fibers here and 24 fibers there. Then that really helps us know, too, as far as from an engineering perspective, how to work through that. We've got several communities that we work with them. Some really large hospital facilities where I can think of one I just looked at recently where, and if I go back to my picture, and if you can think about this farm here is as not a farm, but as like a rural community center or something like that, to be able to provide this connectivity that will get them to the tower, that will get them back to the community center here. It's all doable if you have fiber there. And if my bundle is big enough, and I know that I am for example, we have some middle mile NTIA grant applications that are hopefully coming, that will get some. We applied for 11 routes in Illinois, over and above what we currently have in terms of fiber. So we absolutely would love to work with the communities and try to figure out what's the best way to handle that connectivity.
Yeah, and could you talk briefly about the difference between lit fiber and dark fiber?
Sure. So dark fiber would be where Bluebird would maybe pull out, let's say if a community wanted 24 fibers, or probably more realistically like 12 fibers, that they wanted to have dark fiber. So all they really want is this. They want the physical fiber, that first physical layer of fiber, and then they would light it, put equipment at both ends to light it, manage it, maintain it. And then usually they would have like a router or a switch location that lights that fiber, and that's what they would use to pull back all their traffic. A lot of the private emergency services or private utility networks will work on dark fiber, will implement dark fiber, where lit fiber is the last mile provider would light this, and then the handoff point to the private networks would be at the community. Frankly, having a huge, probably 20 years of my career in dark fiber, it's good if you have the resources to fix it when it breaks. A lot of times people want to think, oh, we want to do it ourselves, we want to save money. Dark fiber is not exactly, that much cheaper than lit, and it's kind of not unlike, for me, not unlike, I want the power, I want to be able to call the power company when the power's out. I used to say to customers, is when I was in a whole different role, and not with Bluebird, I would say, so the person that you need to call is yourself, because dark fiber is just, you're leasing that physical layer of fiber. And I don't want to discourage anyone from doing that. It's great to do if you have the resources on board to fix it when it's broken.
Okay, good. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to thank Laura and Jeff for their presentations. I think there's some great information here and a great level of sophistication, I think, for our community members to really begin to understand how these networks work together and how to work in a partnership with providers to get those networks built. So thank you so much for joining us today, Laura and Jeff.
Yep. Thank you so much, guys, for being here. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Well, you're very welcome. And again, I'm available to anybody. If you want to chat, please let me know. I'm happy to help.
Good. That sounds great. Good. So with that, we're going to go back to our get ready to go to our breakout rooms, and really, now and as we go through our weeks, we're just going to be thinking about our task list, the survey, the provider interviews, the planning for our on-site meetings. And I like to ask people now, as they're beginning their plans for my visit there now in just a couple of weeks, if you could send me kind of what you see as the schedule and kind of what kind of meetings we're planning and requirements for me for presentations. It'd be great to have that all in one place, as well as any kind of local lodging recommendations. That would be really valuable to me. So as our team begins to make plans, your recommendations are valuable to us, and certainly not afraid to move out and not to stay in a standard garden inn. If you have a more interesting place to stay in your community, that'd be great to hear. And then so let's get that done. And then we're just it's really just attacking the task list and moving on to plan and do your work, so that when we get farther down the road, we've got all that information and you're beginning to settle on your vision and different strategies for moving forward. So with that, I'd entertain any kind of questions or comments from folks on the call about where we are and what the heck we're doing.
Hey, Bill, can I just nudge about something?
Sure.
Bill sent an email out asking if all the team leaders could put who attended our January session in Bloomington. If you would please get that to me, I'll drop my email into the chat. I have heard from Anthony, thank you very much. But if the rest of you could do that, I have to report it to the United Soybean Board. So I super appreciate you all helping me out with that.
Yeah, and I've seen a couple more, Adrienne. If you don't have those, I'll forward them to you. So
Thank you.
we're
That's
making,
great.
I think we're at 3 of 5 or so on. So that's
Great.
great.
Perfect.
Hancock County says what to expect from a county board. And I think that would be if you're thinking about the community visits, I would have kind of a presentation about the what we're doing here as a group and why the importance of broadband. Maybe some quick examples of what was happened in other counties from their plans and what might be expected of them as county leaders. And I'll vet that with you so I don't step in any large potholes along the way. But and then just give them an opportunity to ask questions. So it'd be a kind of a quick overview and then a discussion as they want to ask questions. If that makes sense for your communities, let me know. Good. So let's go to the breakout rooms. You might find that I know Robbie, I don't know if Robbie is on the call today. I know he's got some business at the NDIA conference on the agenda and so on. So we'll just go to our rooms and I'll be around to visit. And Nancy, do you have anything for the communities you want to share?
I plan to pop in and see the different teams today and, have a little bit of information for them. And of course, things seem to be going pretty well. The rollouts look really good. So I'll go ahead and launch those breakout rooms and stop the recording. Thanks, everyone.